30 to 50,000 pounds.
Really? Really? Oh, that's amazing, isn't it? Really?
Really?
How much? Wow.
On Antiques Roadshow, forgotten paintings have turned out to be lost masterpieces worth far more than anyone imagined. Welcome to our channel. Today, we're counting down the most valuable portrait paintings ever appraised on Antiques Roadshow. From overlooked heirlooms to portraits of famous historical figures, each discovery proves that one signature, one hidden identity, or one family secret can completely change a painting's value. And the biggest surprise is still to come. Subscribe and ring the bell for more incredible hidden treasure stories. We're starting today's countdown with a portrait that had been treasured by one family for generations. At first glance, it looked like nothing more than a cherished family keepsake. But one name behind the painting changed the entire story. That name was Frederic Remington, widely regarded as the greatest artist of the American West. So how did an ordinary family portrait become a work of art that museums would love to own?
Well, Lee Febbiger was my great-grandfather.
That is this gentleman.
This is this gentleman.
Yes.
And he was a friend of Frederic Remington, who in 1896 painted his portrait as part of a military series in El Paso.
With just a few sentences about its history, the portrait took on an entirely different significance. This was not a routine commissioned painting. It was created by Remington in 1896 while he was producing a series of military portraits in El Paso. The sitter was Captain Leah Febbiger, a U.S. Army officer and a personal friend of the artist. Remington became famous for his paintings, illustrations, and bronze sculptures that captured the spirit of the American frontier with remarkable realism. His work has long been considered the defining image of the Old West and remains highly sought after by collectors. Yet the greatest surprise was still to come.
It also comes with this letter from Remington to your great-grandfather.
Right.
The letter was Remington speaking to the sitter and how much he enjoyed their time together. And there was a lot of meat in it, which is really what you want. There was no anonymity to it at all. It was personal for Remington, and it was personal for the sitter.
Accompanying the portrait was a handwritten letter from Remington himself. In the art world, documentation like this is invaluable because it directly confirms both the painting's provenance and the personal relationship between the artist and his subject. That clear provenance made the portrait even more desirable to collectors and museums alike. Its journey over the following decades was just as remarkable. After Remington's death, the portrait remained in the museum dedicated to his legacy before Captain Febbiger's family spent years arranging for its return. Meanwhile, the market for Remington's work continued to climb, making examples with such exceptional history increasingly rare. By then, only one question remained.
This piece, together with the letter, would be something that I would value at auction between $600,000
Oh my goodness.
and $800,000.
I was hoping I would be wildly exuberant. I am.
That extraordinary appraisal instantly transformed a treasured family heirloom into one of the most valuable Remington portraits ever featured on Antiques Roadshow. After the broadcast, the painting was professionally conserved and placed on public display at the Birmingham Museum of Art. As demand for Remington's work continued to grow, experts later updated its estimated value to between $800,000 and $1.2 million. What began as a family portrait ultimately became an important piece of American artistic history for millions of people to appreciate. Not every valuable painting is purchased as an investment. Sometimes, someone brings a work of art home simply because it creates a feeling they cannot explain. That was exactly how Carol came to live with a portrait titled The Answer for nearly 50 years. She never imagined she was hanging a masterpiece on her wall. So how did a painting bought simply because she loved it become one of the most unforgettable appraisals ever seen on Antiques Roadshow?
I guess it was 1963. I did my junior year in Madrid, Spain. And I lived right close to the Joaquin Sorolla Museum in Madrid. I just fell in love with this because it reminded me of Joaquin Sorolla.
The purchase was entirely driven by emotion. Carol was captivated by the painting's treatment of light, which reminded her of Joaquin Sorolla, the celebrated Spanish painter renowned for his brilliant colors and extraordinary ability to capture natural light. What she did not realize was that the artist was Jane Peterson, one of the most accomplished American women painters of the early 20th century. Peterson was best known for landscapes and vibrant coastal scenes rather than portraits. That made The Answer an exceptionally rare work within her career, one that has always attracted the attention of serious collectors. But that was only part of the story.
Jane Peterson did not really paint figure works like this. The label on the back tells us the title, and it's called The Answer. And it's very mysterious.
It almost looks like her beads have broken.
Beyond its rarity, the painting invites endless questions. The subject gazes downward, her strand of beads appears to have broken, and the title, The Answer, leaves viewers wondering what story is unfolding. That sense of mystery has only made the work more compelling over time. For decades, Carol simply displayed the painting as a treasured reminder of her years in Madrid. But as the art world began to recognize pioneering women artists like Jane Peterson, the value of her finest and rarest works rose dramatically. By then, only one question remained. Just how much was the painting really worth?
As I recall, I paid $150 for it.
$150. I think that a gallery in New York would be asking $300,000.
Where's the chair?
That astonishing appraisal completely changed the painting's future. After the program aired, Carol decided to sell it because her family no longer felt comfortable keeping such a valuable masterpiece at home. The painting was eventually sold for a price close to the expert's estimate. The proceeds allowed Carol to purchase land and build the home where she still lives today, turning a painting bought simply out of admiration into a gift that transformed her life. Sometimes, a masterpiece spends decades quietly displayed on the wall of a church, with no one realizing how significant it truly is. That was exactly the story behind the portrait of Lady Eleanor Alexander. So what transformed a familiar painting in a local cathedral into a work of art that immediately captured the attention of experts?
And I'd love to know where on earth you got it from, so you can tell me.
Well, the painting belongs to St Colum's Cathedral, and it was a gift to the cathedral after the person who owned it died.
From the very first glance, the appraiser was impressed by the painting's exceptional quality. Its delicate layers of color, soft handling of light, and confident brushwork created a remarkable sense of life, rarely found in portraiture from the early 20th century. The story became even more fascinating because of its history. Rather than remaining in a private collection, the portrait had passed through generations before eventually being donated to St. Columba's Cathedral. That well-documented provenance immediately added another layer of importance to the work. But the most significant discovery was still to come.
The lady in the painting is Eleanor Alexander. Her mother was Mrs. Cecil Frances Alexander, and her father was Bishop Alexander.
The sitter was Lady Eleanor Alexander, a member of one of Ireland's most influential religious families. The artist was Walter Osborne, widely regarded as one of the leading Irish painters of the late 19th century. Celebrated for his refined use of light and expressive brushwork, Osborne played an important role in bringing Irish painting into the modern era. He died of pneumonia in his early 40s, and this portrait was completed only 2 years before his death, during the final stage of his career when his style had fully matured. That alone made the work especially appealing to collectors. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for.
I believe it to be between £40,000 and £60,000. But I can see this picture because it's so attractive, driving its price up to more than £80,000.
That's wonderful news.
An estimate of £40,000 to £60,000 was already an extraordinary surprise, but the appraiser believed the portrait's exceptional visual appeal could easily push the final selling price beyond £80,000 if multiple collectors competed for it. A painting that had quietly hung inside a cathedral for decades was now recognized as one of the most compelling Irish portraits of the early 20th century, proving once again that some of the greatest treasures are often hidden in the most unexpected places. Not every important work of art is preserved in a museum or displayed in a prestigious collection. Sometimes, a portrait quietly hangs on the wall of an ordinary family home for decades, with no one realizing they're living alongside a piece of art history. That was exactly the story behind this painting. To the family, it was simply a portrait of their father. But the artist behind it would later become one of the most influential figures in American art.
My father was in the service in 1945. I became friends with Robert Rauschenberg. From my understanding, he wanted to go to an art show on their day of leave, and they went to the art show, and Robert Rauschenberg said, I think I can do that. And so, lo and behold, a few days later, painted my dad's portrait.
In 1945, Robert Rauschenberg was still a young sailor serving in the U.S. Navy. After the war, he devoted himself to art and eventually became one of the pioneers of the Neo-Dada movement, helping shape the future of contemporary American art. Because of that, works created before he achieved international fame are especially desirable. This portrait captures one of his fellow servicemen during the earliest stage of his career, making it far rarer than the works he produced later. But the discovery that truly impressed the appraiser was still to come.
And I think these are great because they actually show, this one right here shows your father sitting while in the Navy with Robert Rauschenberg.
Yes, exactly.
Accompanying the portrait were photographs showing the two men together during their Navy service. To the art world, these were far more than family snapshots. They were valuable evidence confirming the painting's history. Years earlier, the family had even submitted documentation to the Rauschenberg Foundation, where the work received official recognition. The combination of an early painting, outstanding provenance, and authenticated documentation created exactly the kind of package collectors and auction houses hoped to find. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for.
Given the importance of the work, the earliness of the work, and the fact that it has such well-established provenance and authenticity, I would put a conservative auction estimate of $40,000 to $60,000 on it.
Holy cow, are you kidding me? I guess it was worth more than that $2 picture right next to it.
The estimate of $40,000 to $60,000 left the family stunned. What they had always considered nothing more than a treasured reminder of their father was now recognized as an exceptionally rare work from the beginning of Robert Rauschenberg's career. The wartime friendship, the remarkably complete provenance, and Rauschenberg's extraordinary place in American art history combined to transform this modest portrait into a painting that any serious collector would be eager to own. Some portraits are celebrated because of the artist who painted them. Others become even more fascinating because of the person they portray. That was exactly the case with this portrait of Freda Dudley Ward. For decades, the family simply regarded it as an elegant painting passed down through generations. They had no idea they were caring for a work by Singer Sargent, one of the greatest portrait painters in history.
I'd love to know a little bit of your history. Where does it come from?
My parents bought it when it was the dispersal sale of Wyston Hall in the 1950s and 60s.
So you've inherited it and enjoyed it so far?
That's right, yes.
Within moments, the appraiser recognized Singer Sargent's signature and the date, 1921. Those two details alone place the portrait in an entirely different category. Sargent has long been regarded as one of the world's greatest portrait painters. Renowned for capturing both the personality and presence of his subjects with remarkably confident brushwork, his paintings have remained highly sought after by collectors for generations. But the artist was only part of what made this portrait so remarkable.
Do we know much about her?
Only that she was the lady friend of the Prince of Wales, who became Edward VIII. Her name is Freda Dudley Ward.
Freda Dudley Ward was one of the best-known figures in British high society during the early 20th century. She is remembered primarily for her long relationship with the Prince of Wales, who later became King Edward VIII. Years before Wallace Simpson entered his life, Freda was the woman who stood beside the future king. The combination of a masterpiece by a celebrated artist, a genuine historical figure, and a well-preserved provenance gave the portrait everything serious collectors look for. By then, only one question remained.
And in terms of value?
Yeah, is it worth much?
£30,000 to £50,000.
Really? Really?
The estimate of £30,000 to £50,000 left the owner almost speechless. What the family had always treasured as nothing more than a beautiful inherited portrait was now recognized as the work of a master painter that also captured an important figure connected to British royal history. Its artistic quality, historical significance, and well-documented provenance combined to make it exactly the kind of painting collectors would eagerly compete for whenever it appeared on the market. At first glance, this appears to be nothing more than an 18th century pastel portrait, but the longer the experts studied it, the more convinced they became that a much bigger story was hidden behind it. The owner believed it was painted by Richard Cosway, and that the woman in the drawing was Maria Cosway, his famous wife. If that assumption proved correct, the portrait would already be considered an important work.
This is a drawing by Richard Cosway, who is an 18th century British artist. The subject matter is his wife, Maria Cosway.
Richard Cosway is possibly one of England's greatest portrait miniaturists.
Richard Cosway was one of the most celebrated portrait artists among the British aristocracy in the late 18th century. He was best known for his miniature portraits, making a large-scale pastel drawing like this an exceptionally rare discovery. The quality of the work immediately stood out. The natural expression, subtle lighting, and lifelike features created an intimacy rarely seen in portrait drawings of the period. Then a single detail changed the entire direction of the investigation.
If it's Causeway and it's his wife, it's a very important sort of thing. But I might throw you a little curve here. Now the question is whether that's an inscription or a signature.
The inscription R. Causeway might not be the artist's signature at all. Instead, it could simply be an ownership mark left by a collector. If that were true, the drawing might have been created by an entirely different artist. The appraiser even suggested that the quality of the portrait seemed unusually strong for Richard Causeway. For that reason, he believed the drawing deserved much deeper research before any final attribution could be made. That also meant its value could change dramatically depending on what future discoveries revealed.
If this were Causeway and his Maria Causeway, so I would think you estimate this at auction for about $10,000 to $20,000. Now, if it's the other possibility that you might be looking at $30,000 to $40,000, this is one of the best drawings I've seen in years.
Really?
If the portrait truly proved to be the work of Richard Causeway, it could be worth between $10,000 and $20,000. But if future research identified it as the work of another great European master, the value could rise to $30,000 to $40,000. Although the final answer remains uncertain, the appraiser had no doubt that this was one of the finest drawings he had seen in years. Sometimes it is the unanswered questions that make a work of art even more compelling to scholars and collectors alike. Not every family treasure is proudly displayed on a wall. Sometimes it sits quietly inside an old hope chest for generations, waiting to be discovered. That was exactly how this remarkable group of portraits came to light. The owner simply wanted to learn who had painted the faces of her ancestors. But within moments, the appraiser realized these were far more than treasured family keepsakes. They were the work of a remarkable woman whose place in American art history is only now receiving the recognition it deserves.
It was in my grandmother's hope chest, and when she passed away, I found it. It's my great-great-great-grandmother and grandfather. They lived in Willimantic, Connecticut.
For years, the owner assumed the artist must have been a man. One sentence from the appraiser completely changed that assumption. Jane Anthony Davis was one of the very few itinerant female portrait painters working throughout New England during the mid-19th century. Before photography became widely available, she traveled from town to town painting ordinary families, giving them a lasting record of loved ones that could be passed down through future generations. That unique role has made her work increasingly valued by collectors and museums alike.
It's not a him.
Oh, it's not.
It's not. It's a she.
Oh.
And the artist's name is Jane Anthony Davis.
What made this collection even more remarkable was its exceptional state of preservation. The portraits still retain the names of the sitters, the location where they were painted, the artist's signature, and other original documentation. For researchers, that represents extraordinarily strong provenance, allowing the history of the paintings to be traced with unusual confidence. For the family, they preserve the memory of their ancestors. For collectors, they are an exceptionally rare historical record that has survived nearly 2 centuries intact.
This unusual triple portrait and the single portrait would be $25,000 to $35,000.
Oh, that's very nice. My husband will be very surprised.
The estimate of $25,000 to $35,000 came as a wonderful surprise, yet the true importance of these portraits extends well beyond their market value. Together, they preserve 3 generations of one family, while also celebrating the legacy of one of the few female artists working in early American folk portraiture. Their artistic significance, family history, and remarkably complete provenance transformed portraits once forgotten inside an old hope chest into a genuine historical treasure. Some portraits spend their lives hanging in museums. This one spent nearly all of its life overlooking the boardroom of a railway company. For generations, it quietly watched over the people who continued the business founded by George Stephenson's family. No one ever questioned whether it might be a valuable work of art. To the company, it was simply the portrait of the man remembered as the father of the modern railway.
The company that his son set up, Robert Stephenson, was based in Newton and Willows by the railway, and we inherited that company.
And so where was it actually hanging? In the boardroom. It's been in the boardroom for, well, as long as anyone knows, really.
George Stephenson pioneered the development of the steam locomotive and helped transform transportation during the Industrial Revolution. The portrait reflects that achievement through details such as the compass placed beside him, a symbol of his engineering career and the innovations that made his name famous. But as the appraiser examined the painting more closely, an unexpected discovery sent the story in a completely different direction.
But there's a problem, because there is a portrait by Henry Pickersgill in the National Portrait Gallery. Exactly the same picture.
Yeah. Is it a fake?
The National Portrait Gallery owns an almost identical portrait, immediately raising an important question. Was this simply a copy, or could it be another version painted by the artist himself? The appraiser carefully studied the brushwork, the handling of light, and the overall quality of the painting. The longer he looked, the more convinced he became that this was not the work of a copyist. During the 19th century, it was common for established portrait painters to create multiple versions of the same composition.
Well, as a copy, as a contemporary copy, it would be worth £1,500. On balance, I think it is by Henry Pickersgill, and therefore it's not a copy.
Okay.
Probably worth about £25,000.
Gosh, really?
That conclusion changed the painting's value completely. Instead of being worth about £1,500 as a copy, it was identified as a likely original by Henry Pickersgill, increasing its value to around £25,000. Yet what makes the portrait truly memorable is that it never left the place where it belonged. For centuries, George Stephenson's image has remained in the boardroom of the very company founded by his family, making the painting a living part of history rather than simply another portrait on a wall. Not every portrait preserves only the face of a single person. Some paintings also capture an entire era that has long since disappeared. The woman in this portrait was Clara Galassi, better known to European silent film audiences as Dolly Gray. To her family, she was a beloved grandmother. But before that, she was an actress whose image appeared during the early years of European cinema.
This is a portrait that was of my grandmother. Her name was Clara Galassi. She was in movies in Europe, and her stage name was Dolly Gray.
According to the family's story, the portrait was painted in Paris during the 1920s while Clara Galassi was still pursuing her acting career. In the silent film era, performers relied entirely on their expressions and body language to tell a story, making their faces their greatest asset. Perhaps that is why this portrait focuses almost entirely on Dolly Gray's remarkable presence, preserving her at the height of her career.
It is signed lower left, Tadeusz Sztyka. He was a Polish artist born in Poland in 1889, and he was born into a family of artists.
The signature in the corner identifies the artist as Tadeusz Sztyka, a renowned Polish portrait painter who came from a family with several generations of accomplished artists. He became especially admired for his ability to capture the personality of his subjects, something clearly reflected in Dolly Gray's expressive eyes, luminous complexion, and elegant appearance. Beyond its artistic quality, the painting also benefits from exceptionally clear provenance, having remained within the family for decades. That direct history has made it even more desirable to collectors.
I would feel very comfortable putting an auction estimate of $12,000 to $18,000 on the painting.
Okay, wonderful.
If you were going to insure this painting, I would say to insure it for around $30,000.
I see. Okay.
An auction estimate of $12,000 to $18,000, along with an insurance value of around $30,000, reflects the growing appreciation for portrait paintings connected to early 20th century European cultural history. For the family, however, the painting's greatest value has never been financial. It preserves Clara Galassi exactly as audiences once knew her under the stage name Dolly Gray. Nearly a century later, the portrait continues to keep the story of a silent film star alive for future generations. Not every old portrait manages to preserve the full story behind it. Sometimes all that remains are a few old letters and a handful of names that have slowly faded with time. This double portrait was no different. The family had cared for it across generations, but the identities of the two women and even the artist who painted them had gradually become a mystery with no clear answer.
Well, all I know was a letter. So Mrs. Kay, way back in 1900s, claimed that one of the ladies was her great-grandmother. And then about 1920s, a Mr. Kay wrote from Calcutta, but after that it seems to have died, the history.
The letters suggested that the two sitters were believed to be the Kay sisters, but the identity of the artist became the real focus of the appraisal. For years, the painting had been attributed to either George Romney or Thomas Lawrence, two of Britain's most celebrated portrait painters. After carefully studying the brushwork and the treatment of the faces, however, the appraiser reached a very different conclusion.
In my opinion, I don't think it's by either of those two artists. This picture work is probably most likely by an artist called Sir William Beechey,
the way it sort of
who is a
peeks through
lesser-known artist.
Sir William Beechey may not be as widely recognized as Romney or Lawrence, but he served as a leading portrait painter to the British royal court during the reign of King George III. His work is known for its balance, refinement, and remarkably natural portrayal of his subjects. Details such as the hands, the subtle modeling of the faces, and the overall composition all matched Beechey's distinctive style. Combined with the painting's excellent condition after more than 2 centuries, these qualities made it far more appealing to collectors.
Probably going to be worth somewhere in the region of sort of 15, maybe as much as £20,000.
What is that?
Well, it's in very nice condition, which of course is very important.
An estimated value of £15,000 to £20,000 far exceeded anything the family had imagined. Yet the most important outcome of the appraisal was not the price. After centuries of uncertainty and competing attributions, the portrait was finally recognized as a work most likely painted by Sir William Beechey. In doing so, it was transformed from a little-known family painting into an important piece of British art history. Not every valuable portrait depicts kings, generals, or famous historical figures. Sometimes its greatest value comes from preserving an ordinary family's everyday life for more than 2 centuries. This painting has been passed down through the same family for generations. They always knew it portrayed their ancestors, but the identity of the artist slowly disappeared with time.
Do you know who all these people are?
Yes, this is my great-great-grandfather and his family. This was painted about 1820. They lived in Leith, just outside Edinburgh.
While researching the painting, the appraiser discovered that it had been exhibited at the Scottish National Gallery in 1956. It was there that the work was attributed to Charles Robertson, a Scottish artist best known for his miniature portraits. Robertson's experience with miniature painting gave him an exceptional ability to capture facial expressions and personality. That skill is evident throughout this family portrait, where every individual displays a distinct character, making the entire scene feel more like a genuine family moment than a carefully arranged composition.
Because it was exhibited in the Scottish National Gallery in 1956,
yes.
At which point they attributed it to Charles Robertson.
The painting is equally impressive for its remarkable attention to detail. The experts even identified a patented expanding toast rack dating from 1807, an important clue that helped confirm the period in which the portrait was created. Beyond the carefully painted objects, the way the family members look toward one another brings warmth and movement to the scene. That sense of authenticity transforms the painting into a valuable record of everyday life in an early 19th century Scottish household.
It's got to command £15,000. I think it could even go up to £20,000.
But I wouldn't replace it.
You couldn't replace it.
An estimated value of £15,000 to £20,000 reflects the growing appreciation for Charles Robertson's work and the appeal of family portraits with well-documented provenance. For the owner, however, the painting's true worth goes far beyond its market value. It is like a family photograph created long before cameras existed, preserving not only the faces of past generations, but also their daily lives, emotions, and ordinary moments that remain vividly alive more than 200 years later. Not every portrait is large enough to hang across an entire wall. Some are small enough to fit in the palm of a hand, yet preserve the story of someone who played a role in the history of the British Empire. This portrait miniature has remained in the same family for generations. From the moment the experts saw it, they knew it was more than a treasured heirloom. It had been created for a man of remarkable importance.
This is a very beautiful
David Anderson. He's my 4 times great-grandfather.
There's lovely pearls here with his initial.
David Anderson served as the trusted right-hand man of Warren Hastings, the first Governor-General of British India. His prominent position explains why he owned such an exquisitely crafted portrait miniature. During the late 18th century, miniature portraits painted on ivory were considered luxury objects, often carried as personal keepsakes or given as meaningful gifts. Even the tiny pearl monogram and the remarkably fine details of the face demonstrate the extraordinary skill required to create works like this.
Well, now, the thing is that it's not actually signed by Cosway.
Signed by E.
Exactly. There's a large E in it.
Yeah.
It's a very cursive E, slightly tilted over.
Right.
And I don't think there's any doubt that it is the signature of another artist, an artist called Engelhardt.
For many years, the family believed the portrait had been painted by Richard Cosway, but a single detail in the signature completely changed that conclusion. The true artist was George Engelhardt, one of Britain's greatest miniature portrait painters of the late 18th century. Engelhardt became renowned for capturing expressive faces with remarkable depth and subtle color. Combined with the family's clear provenance and David Anderson's historical significance, the portrait became an especially desirable work for collectors.
It's worth about £5,000, £6,000, £7,000.
Right.
And yet, it's such a good one. It could well reach 5 figures.
Crazy.
An initial estimate of £5,000 to £7,000 was already impressive. However, the appraiser believed the exceptional quality of the miniature could easily push its value into 5 figures at auction. Yet the portrait's greatest importance extends beyond its price. Within a frame small enough to fit in a hand, it preserves the image of a historical figure, the craftsmanship of one of Britain's finest miniature painters, and a family story that has survived intact through generations. At first glance, this appears to be nothing more than a small enamel portrait with an elegant and refined appearance. But the moment the back is turned over, the experts are presented with almost the entire story behind it. The identity of the sitter, the date it was created, and the artist are all carefully recorded. Very few works of art still preserve such complete information after nearly 2 centuries. Yet what truly sets this portrait apart is the remarkably demanding technique used to create it.
It certainly makes life easier when they write it all out on the back, doesn't it? The entire history. My interest in enamel has really been in the way it's been made and the techniques over the centuries.
Unlike an oil painting, an enamel portrait is created on a copper plaque coated with enamel and repeatedly fired in a kiln after each layer of color is applied. Even the slightest error in temperature can ruin the entire piece. For that reason, enamel painting has long been regarded as one of the most challenging techniques in European art. The inscription on the reverse also reveals that this is not an ordinary portrait, but a memorial image of Lady Georgiana Charlotte Quinn, created years after her death.
Lady Georgiana Charlotte Quinn, third daughter of George John Earl Spencer, KG. Born 1794, died 1823, which means this is a portrait that was a memento mori. It was done 10 years after she died, in memory.
Lady Georgiana Charlotte Quinn belonged to the distinguished Spencer family. During the 19th century, memento mori portraits like this were commissioned by aristocratic families to preserve the memory of loved ones before photography existed. The portrait became even more significant when it was identified as the work of Henry Pierce Bone, based on an original miniature by George Hayter. Bone served as the official enamel painter to the British royal family and was celebrated for transforming portraits into exceptional enamel works. Historical records also show that he completed a number of commissions for the Spencer family.
But if it's insured for anything less than 10,000, then you should put it up, in my opinion.
Ah, jolly good. Well, that's very nice to hear, thank you, because I paid 8 for it.
According to the appraiser, the portrait should be insured for more than £10,000, exceeding the approximately £8,000 the owner originally paid for it. Yet its true importance lies far beyond that difference in value. It represents a rare combination of masterful enamel craftsmanship, well-documented aristocratic provenance, and a remarkable historical story that has remained almost completely intact for nearly 200 years, making it one of the most memorable portraits ever featured on the program. Not every painting makes visitors stop the moment they walk into a room. Yet this portrait has done exactly that for generations. Without elaborate clothing or an extravagant setting, the woman in the painting draws every eye simply through her relaxed pose and the way light gently falls across her figure. From the very first glance, the experts knew they were looking at the work of a remarkably accomplished artist.
So on a chilly, misty Worcestershire morning, I like nothing better than to get my teeth into something really wonderful like this. It's such a beautiful picture. The artist, William Strang. The date, about 1910, I think. And the subject, one of the most extraordinarily beautiful nudes I've ever seen.
The painting was originally purchased by the owner's great-grandfather and has remained in the same family ever since. For more than a century, it has rarely left the drawing room, becoming a familiar part of the family's daily life rather than an investment. That uninterrupted provenance also makes the work especially attractive to collectors. William Strang was one of the earliest students of the Slade School of Art and earned a reputation as an exceptional draftsman. In this painting, the appraiser also recognized the influence of Edgar Degas in the composition and the handling of light, giving the portrait a quiet elegance and remarkable vitality.
William Strang was one of the very early pupils of the Slade Art School. He was a great draftsman. He was very open to influence. He was a very curious man. He was an intellectual, really. And he loved to look at the work of other artists. And with William Strang, it's always worth looking to see what his influence is in any particular picture. I think in this one, perhaps Degas.
What makes the painting so compelling is its restraint rather than dramatic effects. The background has been reduced to the essentials, allowing complete attention to fall on the figure and the subtle play of light across the model's body. Its soft, matte surface with little or no varnish still gives the impression that the paint is remarkably fresh despite its age. The combination of artistic quality, clear family provenance, and William Strang's reputation has made this painting a highly desirable work in today's art market.
Well, I'm going to put £10,000 to £15,000 on it. Really? Yeah. I've pushed the bait out a little bit for a picture this size because it is just so incredibly beautiful.
The estimate of £10,000 to £15,000 reflects both William Strang's standing and the exceptional quality of this particular painting. Yet what makes it truly memorable is its timeless beauty. After hanging on the same wall through 3 generations, the woman in the portrait still has the power to make anyone entering the room stop and admire her once again. At first glance, this portrait captures what feels like the final moments before a young woman steps into one of the most important occasions of her life. Dressed in a white gown with a soft fur wrap and wearing a calm, confident expression, Margaret Robertson appears both elegant and approachable. Yet what intrigued the experts even more than the sitter herself was the woman behind the easel, a rare female artist who built a successful career at a time when the art world was almost entirely dominated by men.
Was a ravishing young woman all dressed up to go to the ball. Who was she?
This young lady is my 4 times great-aunt, Margaret Robertson, and she was painted by her sister-in-law, my other 4 times great-aunt, Christina Robertson.
Christina Robertson's signature and the date 1842 are still visible on the painting. Margaret was 21 years old at the time, an age that marked a young woman's formal entrance into society in 19th century Britain. Every detail, from the satin dress to the elegant shawl, was carefully chosen to reflect both her status and the importance of the occasion. Unlike many formal portraits of the period, Christina painted her subject looking directly at the viewer, giving the portrait a natural warmth instead of a rigid ceremonial feel.
She was awarded in 1841 an honorary member of the Imperial Royal Academy, which was really quite an achievement.
She was almost constantly pregnant and still painting. Phenomenal lady she was.
That really is quite something.
Born in Scotland, Christina Robertson established her reputation in London before achieving even greater success in Russia, where she became a favorite portrait painter among the aristocracy. In 1841, she was named an honorary member of the Imperial Academy, a remarkable distinction for a foreign female artist. Even more impressive, she maintained an outstanding artistic career while raising a large family and enduring repeated pregnancies. Her extraordinary life story gives this portrait a significance that extends well beyond its visual beauty.
Such a gorgeous painting with the provenance that it has and the direct relation to the artist. I wouldn't hesitate to put an estimate at auction in the region of £8,000 to £12,000.
Thank you.
I think it's very relatable even today.
With direct family provenance linking the work to the artist herself, the appraiser placed an auction estimate of £8,000 to £12,000 on the portrait. Yet its greatest value lies beyond the market price. Within a single painting, it preserves 2 remarkable stories: the image of a young woman at one of the defining moments of her life, and the legacy of an artist who overcame extraordinary barriers to earn her place in the history of European art. This is more than just the portrait of a man who lived over 2 centuries ago. For the owner's family, the painting has long been considered part of the home itself. It has been passed down through generations, along with stories of a sea captain who was believed to quietly return after his final voyage. But for the experts, the most fascinating part was the real life of the man captured in the portrait.
We believe this is Aaron Delano, and he would be my 5th great-granduncle. He was born in 1767 And unfortunately, he passed away, lost at sea, in 1794.
According to family records, Aaron Delano was a young sea captain who sailed the waters of New England in the late 18th century. At the time, coastal trade offered great opportunity, but also tremendous danger, and Aaron was lost at sea in 1794, never to return. Perhaps because there was never a final farewell, stories about him gradually evolved into family legends. Yet the painting's true importance lies in the remarkable details the artist chose to include.
We see portraits of people's relatives all the time, and very, very seldom do we ever see anything with this much going on in it. That looks like a map, and that instrument is an octant, but they were used for navigational purposes.
This is a rare example of an American folk art portrait. Rather than simply depicting Aaron's likeness, the artist included a map and an octant, a navigational instrument once used to determine position at sea. These details transform the painting into more than a family portrait. They tell the story of the man's profession and the life he lived. Although the artist remains unidentified, Aaron's face and the maritime symbols have survived remarkably well, making the work especially appealing to collectors of Americana.
And so after much conversation at the folk art table, we feel like at an auction, in as-is condition, its value would be $8,000 to $10,000.
Hey, that's good. It's exciting.
The estimate of $8,000 to $10,000 reflects the appeal of an American folk portrait with clear family provenance and a direct connection to an actual figure from New England's maritime history. Yet what makes this painting truly unforgettable is the story behind it. More than 200 years later, Aaron Delano lives on not only through his portrait, but also through the memories and family legends that continue to be passed down from one generation to the next. For generations, this painting has carried an unusual nickname within the family, the Scary Portrait. The two children staring directly at the viewer made more than one family member uneasy. As a child, the current owner didn't like being anywhere near it. But over time, the portrait transformed from something unsettling into one of the family's most treasured possessions, eventually earning a place in the dining room where everyone could see it.
This has been passed down for generations on my mother's side of the family, and she's from the East Coast, Providence, Newport, Rhode Island area. It's known as the Scary Portrait.
The identities of the two children have been lost over time, but the family's provenance tracing back to Providence and Newport, Rhode Island has remained intact. Based on the clothing and interior setting, the appraiser believes the portrait was painted sometime during the 1870s or 1880s. What truly sets the painting apart is that the artist made no attempt to hide the older sister's crutches. At a time when many families preferred idealized portraits of their children, including such a detail reflected acceptance and affection rather than an effort to conceal her disability.
This is a very finely painted portrait, and the children are just done beautifully. This is an oil on canvas. The parents chose to include the crutches and embrace the disability of the older sister. She's got her hands on her brother.
That is exactly why the portrait is regarded so highly within American folk art. Rather than simply recording two faces, the artist captured a touching family story. Although the painter's identity remains unknown, the confident handling of the faces, hands, and composition suggests someone with solid academic training. Its emotional subject matter and honest presentation make the work stand out among many family portraits from the same period.
It's just a fabulous thing, and a conservative auction estimate would be $6,000 to $8,000, and we think for insurance purposes it probably would be around $15,000.
Wow, that's unbelievable. I love these kids.
As you should. I think they're wonderful.
These are my relatives.
The appraiser placed a conservative auction estimate of $6,000 to $8,000 on the painting, with an insurance value of around $15,000. Yet the numbers are only part of its story. Once remembered as the family's scary portrait, it has become a symbol of love and shared history. Behind those mysterious expressions is the moving story of two siblings and parents who chose to celebrate, rather than hide, their daughter. More than a century later, that honesty continues to resonate with everyone who stands before the painting. Not every work by a famous artist begins in a studio or as a commission from a wealthy collector. This portrait was born from a chance meeting during the Second World War. The man in the drawing was simply a marine engineer, yet his encounter with Stanley Spencer left his family with a treasured keepsake that has been preserved for generations. The moment the experts recognized the artist's signature, they knew this was far more than an ordinary portrait.
Well, the artist is Stanley Spencer, one of the most important artists in Britain this century. This is made in the war, 1944. Tell me about the portrait.
My father-in-law was a marine engineer.
In 1944, Jack's ship stopped at Port Glasgow for repairs before returning to wartime convoy duty. While waiting, he and his wife rented rooms at a boarding house, where Stanley Spencer happened to be staying as well. After many casual conversations, the two men became friends. Then one evening, Spencer simply said, "Sit down, Jack, and I'll draw you." In just a short sitting, he created the portrait that Jack's family still treasures today.
Stanley Spencer paintings at last are getting their due recognition, and a great masterpiece could be over £1 million today. A painting.
Yes, I know.
A great masterpiece. This drawing is a beautiful drawing.
Stanley Spencer is widely regarded as one of Britain's most important 20th century artists. He became famous for portraying ordinary people with remarkable emotional depth and humanity. In recent years, the market for Spencer's work has continued to grow, bringing renewed attention not only to his major paintings, but also to drawings and portraits with strong provenance like this one. What makes this portrait so memorable is not just the artist's reputation, but the genuine human story captured within a few simple lines.
But I would have thought in the region of 6 to 8, maybe £10,000.
Really?
Well, it's a marvellous drawing by, he's a very important artist.
That is a shock. I had no idea. None at all.
The appraiser estimated the portrait at between £6,000 and £8,000, with the possibility of reaching around £10,000. Yet its greatest value lies in its complete provenance and the remarkable story behind it. A chance encounter during wartime grew into a friendship, and that friendship was preserved through Stanley Spencer's remarkable talent. More than 80 years later, the portrait remains a reminder that life's most ordinary moments can sometimes become its most enduring works of art. At first glance, this appears to be nothing more than a small portrait of a young woman standing quietly beside Lake Como. There is no elaborate composition or dramatic detail to draw immediate attention. For the owner's family, it was simply a portrait of a beloved aunt that had been passed down through generations. But after only a few moments of careful examination, the experts realized that the painting's true significance lay in the signature tucked away in the corner.
Well, this little painting is by an artist called Émile Auguste Pinchard. Did you know that?
No, I did not.
Well, he's one of those artists who's very little known.
The inscription identifies the sitter as Miss Allen, painted during a visit to Lake Como in northern Italy. The peaceful lakeside setting gives the portrait a gentle atmosphere that feels very different from a traditional formal portrait. Miss Allen herself belonged to the Allen and Unwin family, the famous publishing house associated with many of Britain's greatest literary figures. It is a meaningful family keepsake, but it also opens the door to the fascinating story of the artist behind the brush.
He's French, in fact, and a pupil of a very classical artist called Jerome. But here, he's not being Jerome-like at all. He's moved to Switzerland.
Yes.
He's being much more avant-garde for the time.
Émile Auguste Pinchard studied under the celebrated painter Jean-Léon Gérôme, yet this work reveals a much softer and more modern approach. Instead of following strict academic traditions, Pinchard focused on natural light, delicate colors, and the peaceful atmosphere of an outdoor setting. Although he never achieved the fame of many of his contemporaries, Pinchard earned admiration for blending portraiture with landscape, creating works that feel like intimate moments captured from everyday life, rather than conventional formal portraits.
But I think it's absolutely beautiful, and it seems extraordinary, but I think one could buy a picture like this for, say, £3,000 or £4,000. Now, if Mr. Pinchard had a slightly different name, which was better known, we might be talking about £15,000.
The appraiser valued the painting at approximately £3,000 to £4,000. At the same time, he pointed out an interesting reality of the art market. An artist's reputation can influence a work's value almost as much as its artistic quality. Even so, for the owner's family, this portrait remains a priceless heirloom, preserving both the image of Miss Allen beside Lake Como and the legacy of a talented artist whose name has gradually faded from history. Some paintings capture attention not because of their value, but because no one truly knows what they are. This portrait carries no signature, no supporting documentation, and even the identity of the woman remains only a theory. Yet the moment the experts saw her face, they all had the same reaction. It looked strangely familiar.
This is a mystery picture. It's not signed, I'm not sure who it's by, and I don't know who the sitter is, although she looks very familiar to me. Can you tell me something about this wonderful lady?
The story began in the late 1950s when the owner bought the painting from an antiquarian bookshop on Kensington Church Street for just £15. The dealer simply described it as a portrait of a woman named Wolfe. But once it was taken home, her husband, a writer and literary critic, immediately remarked that the woman looked remarkably like Virginia Woolf. From that moment on, the family began researching the Bloomsbury Group and became increasingly convinced that they might own the portrait of one of Britain's most influential writers.
Well, I always believed her to be Virginia Woolf.
Virginia Woolf, absolutely.
When I bought her in a shop in Kensington Church Street, it was an antiquarian bookshop. Right. They said it was a Mrs. Woolf. My late husband, who was a writer and critic, said, "Oh, she looks like Virginia Woolf."
Her hairstyle, clothing, and facial features closely resemble photographs of Virginia Woolf from the early 20th century. However, the appraiser also noticed that the quality of the painting varies from one area to another, making it extremely difficult to identify the artist. Even the National Portrait Gallery has been unable to confirm the sitter's identity based solely on the images submitted. That uncertainty is exactly what makes the painting so fascinating. Its value depends almost entirely on whether the mystery can ever be solved.
If it's Virginia Woolf, on the other hand, and we can prove that, we're probably talking about £1,500, £2,000. If we can find out who the artist is, we're probably talking about £10,000. So we've still got a lot of work to do, I'm afraid. So I'm sorry I can't trade.
I don't actually want to sell her.
If the portrait simply depicts an unknown woman, its value would remain relatively modest. If it could be proven to portray Virginia Woolf, the estimate would rise to around £1,500 to £2,000. And if the artist's identity were ever established, its value could increase to approximately £10,000. Yet for the owner, money has never been the most important part of the story. After living with the painting for more than half a century, she has chosen to keep it as an unsolved mystery, and perhaps that lingering question is exactly what continues to make the portrait so compelling today. The painting's so fascinating. Its value depends almost entirely on whether the mystery can ever be solved. Among the remarkable collection at Ickworth House, this self-portrait stands out for a very different reason. The woman in the painting is not presented as a queen or an aristocrat of great power. Instead, she faces the viewer with a gentle smile and quiet confidence. What makes the portrait even more remarkable is that the woman before us is also the artist who painted it.
But the picture I really wanted to show you is this one.
Now, who's this?
This is the self-portrait of Madame Vigie Lebrun. She is the painter of the portrait of the fourth Earl that we saw earlier.
Ah.
In this self-portrait, Elizabeth Vigie Lebrun places herself unusually close to the viewer, creating the feeling of a personal conversation rather than a formal pose. That sense of intimacy became one of her defining strengths, allowing her portraits of the European aristocracy to feel graceful, natural, and full of life. By the time she painted this work, Vigie Lebrun had become one of Europe's most successful female artists. She was celebrated as the portrait painter of Marie Antoinette, but the French Revolution forced her to leave France and spend many years in exile. Even so, royal courts across Europe continued to seek her extraordinary talent.
She was 35 when she painted this picture, so she's flattered herself somewhat, but I think the charm, you can see, would still have been there. When the French Revolution came, she found herself in a very difficult position because she had been a court painter.
It was during those years that she met the fourth Earl of Bristol, who first commissioned his own portrait before asking her to paint this self-portrait for the Ickworth collection. His decision reflected not only his admiration for her artistic ability, but also his appreciation of the remarkable woman behind the paintings. Far more than an accomplished painter, Vigie Lebrun became one of the highest-paid portrait artists of her era, an extraordinary achievement for a woman in the late 18th century.
As a woman, she might have suffered in previous years, and I think that if that's the case, she needs reinstating now. She's a wonderful painter. She was the highest paid portrait painter of her day.
What makes this painting unforgettable is not only its artistic quality, but the way Vigée Lebrun chose to present herself to history. Her direct gaze, natural smile, and quiet confidence create the image of a woman who was both elegant and remarkably accomplished. More than 2 centuries later, this self-portrait continues to remind viewers why Elisabeth Vigée Lebrun is regarded as one of the greatest female painters in the history of European art. Among all the paintings brought to the roadshow that day, this one immediately stood apart. The woman in the portrait turns to look directly at the viewer with remarkable confidence and quiet charm. Yet the first detail that caught the appraiser's attention was not her expression, but a signature so faded that it was almost impossible to read.
This is quite clearly 19th century in character. But it's by a family, Madrazo. This is by Raimondo, and there are a whole number of members of the family.
The Madrazo family produced several generations of distinguished Spanish painters, making accurate attribution a challenge, especially when a signature has faded with time. Raimundo de Madrazo became the most celebrated member of the family, admired for elegant portraits of fashionable European women. Rather than placing his sitters in stiff, formal poses, he captured them in natural moments, giving his portraits a sense of movement, personality, and effortless sophistication.
And it's rather curious here because the signature here, it's not very clearly an R, but I think I've been able to decipher it correctly, that it in fact is Raimundo. Now, it's a splendid, quite showy painting, isn't it?
After carefully deciphering the signature, the appraiser became even more confident that the painting was indeed by Raimundo. The sitter's graceful confidence immediately draws the eye, but the real brilliance lies in the artist's technique. With only a few bold contrasts and assured brushstrokes, he brings the woman's skin, hair, and expression vividly to life, while keeping the background simple so every bit of attention remains focused on her face. That remarkable balance is exactly why collectors continue to value Raimundo's work so highly.
The contrast here with this jacket, which I don't know whether it really was purple, but was probably purpley black of some kind. And I think the wonderful painting on the back of the neck, just pushed in the paint with the brush strokes.
The combination of exceptional technique, Raimundo de Madrazo's reputation, and the painting's excellent condition elevates this portrait far beyond a decorative work of art. From a signature that had almost disappeared with age, the appraiser uncovered the identity of the artist and revealed the story behind the canvas. It is a perfect reminder that in the art world, a single small detail can completely transform the way both experts and collectors understand a painting. The moment the appraiser saw this painting, he immediately identified it as the work of Charles Pears. It wasn't the ship or the lighthouse that gave it away, but the unmistakable way the sea had been painted. It was a distinctive style that Pears developed over many years of capturing Britain's maritime landscapes.
Do you know, when I walked into the room earlier on, saw this picture, I immediately said Charles Pears. And the reason I said Charles Pears was because of this distinctive treatment of the sea. And it shows a French bark backing off, as it were, having discovered Beachy Head in fog.
Charles Pears became renowned for making the sea the true subject of his paintings. In this work, the dense fog, rolling water, and low viewpoint make the viewer feel as though they are standing on the deck of the ship. Using layered tones of gray and blue, he created the tense atmosphere of a vessel spotting Beachy Head through the fog and carefully turning away. What makes the story even more interesting is that the painting has remained with the same family since 1937, when the owner's father purchased it directly from an exhibition.
It was purchased by my father at an exhibition in 1937. I understand he paid about £150 for it at the time.
It's quite a bit of money, actually, wasn't it?
It almost brought a small fracas in the family because my mother thought it was rather an excessive purchase in those days.
At the time, £150 was a substantial amount of money, enough to spark a family disagreement over whether the purchase was too extravagant. Ironically, that decision allowed the painting to remain in the family's care for nearly 90 years, preserving a clear ownership history that collectors value highly. When it finally appeared on Antiques Roadshow, The owner still had it insured for only a little over £1,000 because it had never been professionally appraised.
Well, you'll have to multiply that figure by a fair number today. Today, it's worth at auction in the region of around £8,000 to £12,000. And for insurance, you'd need to increase your insurance figure to something like £15,000, £16,000.
It's a lot more than I thought it was.
The new valuation far exceeded the family's expectations. According to the appraiser, the painting could bring between £8,000 and £12,000 at auction, while its insurance value should be increased to around £15,000 to £16,000. What was once considered an overly expensive purchase in 1937 has become proof that some of the most controversial art purchases turn out to be the wisest long-term investments. And with Charles Peers, his distinctive way of painting the sea is enough for knowledgeable viewers to recognize his work almost instantly.